Oi! What's that supposed to be then? A doodle from some sailor's drunken night out in Hong Kong? The voice cut sharp across the spring afternoon air of Catterick Garrison's regimental open day. Families milled about the parade square. The smell of fried onions and chip fans hung heavy, mingling with the sound of children squealing as they ran after a football. The one who'd spoken was Sergeant Tom Harker, his red beret tilted just so, a half-eaten pork pie still clutched in one hand. He gestured with it towards the faded tattoo on the forearm of an old man sitting alone on a wooden bench. The paras nearby sniggered. "Looks more like a worm trying to strangle a breadstick, Sarge," one of them added, drawing another ripple of laughter. Arthur "Artie" Collins, 82 years old, didn't so much as twitch. He sat upright, hands resting on his knees, eyes on the children tumbling across the grass. The sight of their laughter, so free, so careless, was something he once thought he'd never live to see again. He hadn't come for the fairground atmosphere. He had come for that faint hum of belonging that only a place like this carried, even in peacetime. Harker took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. His shadow fell across Artie. The festive din around them seemed to fade, shrinking to the space between the young sergeant's polished parade boots and the old man's scuffed brogues. "Bit of advice, Grandad," Harker said, his tone mock-friendly but loud enough for onlookers to catch. "Cover that mess up. Not exactly the example we want for the recruits. Army's got standards, you know. Can't have old blokes flaunting prison art." The laughter swelled again, a pack of lads drunk on their own youth and camaraderie. To them, everything was a test, pass or fail, strong or weak. And in this frail old man with parchment skin and watery eyes, they saw only weakness. A relic, something to scoff at in an army of drones, satellites, and cutting-edge kit. Artie slowly turned his head, his gaze finally meeting Harker's. His eyes were pale, tired, not with fear, not with anger, but with a depth that spoke of burdens carried alone for too long. "It has meaning," Artie said. His voice was gravel, roughened by time. Harker smirked, confidence swelling at what he took to be victory. "Oh, I'm sure it does. Bet you've got a story to go with it, eh? How you and your mates stormed a trench with a butter knife. Whole pub'll buy you a pint for that one." He turned, raising his voice so his lads could hear. "These old-timers love their tales. Problem is, after a few decades at the Legion, they can't tell fact from the fiction they've been spinning." The insult stuck in the air, souring the spring warmth. A mother nearby tightened her hold on her boy's hand and pulled him closer. "Right then. Let's see your ID," Harker barked suddenly, flipping from mockery to authority. "You even authorized to be here? Or are you one of those stolen valor types we hear about?" The words hit like a blow. In their world, stolen valor was worse than lying. It was sacrilege. Artie moved slowly, his motions deliberate. He reached into the back pocket of his worn jacket and drew out a battered leather wallet, the kind that had shaped itself to a man's body over decades. His fingers struggled with the clasp, stiff with age. Harker sighed impatiently, shifting his weight from one polished boot to the other. The old man's slowness grated on him, another sign of obsolescence. As the wallet opened, a corner of a photograph slipped into view. A ghostly young man's face, eyes shadowed, uniform faded. And for Artie, the sunlit parade square dissolved. The humid crush of jungle air pressed around him. The stench of mud, sweat, and decay filled his nostrils. A single candle flickered, lighting the sweat-streaked face of a comrade crouched beside him. The sting came sharp, rhythmic. A sharpened bamboo splinter dipped in soot and ash, puncturing his skin. His captain's whisper carried more weight than a shout. "They'll never know our names. They'll never find our bodies. But they'll know we were here. This mark is our stone." The shape forming on his arm was a serpent coiled around a dagger, fangs bared, blade upright. The symbol of a ghost unit, a promise made in shadows. The jungle blinked away. Bright Yorkshire sunlight returned, harsh in his eyes. "Come on then, old man," Harker snapped, hand outstretched, palm open. The ID, let's have it. What's your name? Arthur Collins. Never heard of you. The crowd shifted uneasily, some edging closer, others turning away. For them, this was no longer light-hearted banter. This was something sour, a humiliation on open display. And standing at the edge of the circle, one woman, Margaret Wallace, wife of a serving officer, clutched her phone tightly. She had been taking a picture of her son on the climbing wall when the shouting drew her attention. What she saw made her stomach turn. She dialed the number she knew by heart. Her father's voice came calm but edged with steel. "What's wrong, love?" She spoke quickly, quietly, describing the scene, the mocking, the insults, the tattoo. "It's old, faded. Looks like a snake wrapped round a dagger." On the other end came a sharp intake of breath, then silence. Long, heavy silence. "Dad, you there?" His voice returned, urgent, stripped of warmth. "Margaret, listen to me carefully. Don't let that man leave. Do whatever you have to do, but keep him there. I'm making a call. You've no idea who you're standing with." The line went dead. Margaret froze, heart pounding, eyes darting back to the quiet, dignified figure on the bench. And with a chill, she realized the paras thought they were mocking easy prey. They had no idea they were prodding a sleeping serpent. The call from retired Regimental Sergeant Major Wallace hit the chain of command like a lightning strike. Inside the headquarters at Catterick Garrison, a young captain was fielding schedules and routine calls when the secure line lit up. He answered, and a gravelly voice tore through the receiver. "Get me General Whitmore, now. I don't care if he's in a meeting with the Prime Minister himself. Sir, Tell him it's about Iron Serpent, and tell him a man named Arthur Collins is sitting on your parade square. Move!" The words froze the captain. Iron Serpent. He had never heard it spoken aloud, only whispered in rumors buried beneath decades of dust. He dropped the receiver, sprinted through the corridors, and burst into the general's office without knocking. General Sir James Whitmore, a man carved from iron and stone, looked up from a stack of reports. His dark eyes narrowed. "This had better be a matter of national security, Captain." The young officer stammered. "Sir, it's Wallace on the line. He said it's about Iron Serpent. And there's a man named Arthur Collins on the main parade ground." The pen slipped from Whitmore's fingers and clattered against the oak desk. For a heartbeat, all color drained from his face. His gaze shot to a modest frame on his credenza. Inside it was a black and white photograph, 12 gaunt young men in jungle smocks, eyes burning with an intensity beyond their years. Ghosts. All supposed to be ghosts. "My God," Whitmore whispered, his voice cracked. "He's alive." In an instant, the formidable commander was gone. What remained was a man staring into the abyss of his own history. He shot to his feet, chair scraping violently across the floor. His fist slammed against the desk. "Get my car, now! Scramble the honor guard. I want the regimental commander, the adjutant, and Colonel Jennings from archives with the sealed files on Iron Serpent. 5 minutes, Captain. Move." The young officer saluted and ran, heart hammering. Back on the sunlit lawn, Sergeant Harker had run out of patience. The old man's calm refusal to be intimidated gnawed at him. In front of his men, in front of a growing crowd, it felt like defiance. "Right, that's it," Harker snapped, stepping forward. He reached out, hand poised to seize the old man's arm. "You're done here, old man. Time we escorted you off. Maybe straight to the VA for a checkup." It was the final insult. To suggest the man was senile, unfit, a nuisance to be ushered away. The crowd gasped. Mothers clutched their children. Even some paras shifted uneasily. Just as Harker's hand was about to close on Collins's arm, a sound sliced through the air. Not the band's music, not the laughter of children, not the pop of the rifle range. Sirens. Growing louder, closer, urgent. Heads turned as a convoy of black staff cars, flanked by military police Land Rovers with lights flashing, stormed across the parade ground. Families scattered as tires tore through the grass. The vehicles screeched to a halt less than 50 feet from the confrontation. Doors flew open before the cars fully stopped. MPs fanned out, forming a tight perimeter with chilling precision. The festive air collapsed. What remained was a tension so sharp it felt like steel wire stretched across the square. From the lead car a figure emerged. The sunlight caught the polished insignia, 4 silver stars. General Sir James Whitmore. He was flanked by his adjutant, his RSM, and Colonel Jennings clutching a sealed case. They advanced across the grass like a force of nature, grim-faced and unstoppable. The paras snapped to attention, eyes wide with dawning dread. Sergeant Harker's hand fell limply to his side. His mind raced. Why was the base commander here? Why the honor guard? Why this response for an old man on a bench? But Whitmore did not spare them a glance. Every ounce of his focus was fixed on Arthur Collins, and when he stopped just a few feet away, the world seemed to shrink to 2 men, a decorated general and a forgotten sergeant, bound by a secret history no one else could understand. Whitmore drew himself tall, raised his hand, and delivered the sharpest salute of his career. "Sergeant Collins," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "It is an honor, sir." The parade ground at Catterick Garrison was silent as if time itself had been arrested. The air was heavy, brittle, charged with something no one could quite name. Children stopped mid-chase. Parents froze with half-lifted phones. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned the trees. General Sir James Whitmore still held his salute, ramrod straight, eyes locked on the frail old man before him. The gesture, so crisp, so full of reverence, sent a shiver through every soldier present. Slowly, with the weight of 8 decades on his shoulders, Arthur Collins rose. His frame was bent but unbroken. His return salute was not sharp but steady, carved out of bone-deep dignity. It was a salute that bridged half a century of silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several wives of serving officers clutched their mouths. A few older veterans, men who had seen Malaya and Borneo, stood with tears streaking their weathered cheeks. Whitmore lowered his hand, turned to face the crowd, and took from Colonel Jennings a leather case sealed with wax. He cracked it open, pulling out yellowed papers stamped classified, top secret. His voice carried like steel over the square. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have witnessed here is not an ordinary encounter. You are looking at a man history itself tried to erase." Murmurs spread, nervous, uncertain. "This man," Whitmore continued, pointing to Collins, "is the last surviving member of a unit so secret it was buried under the Official Secrets Act for half a century. A unit that officially never existed. A unit known only by whispers in the dark. Iron Serpent." The name hit the ground like a thunderclap. A few older officers in the audience stiffened visibly, recognizing the legend. Whitmore opened the file and read, though his eyes needed no guide. In 1958, during the Malayan Emergency, an RAF signals officer was shot down deep in jungle held by communist insurgents. He carried intelligence so vital that had it been captured, the entire Commonwealth campaign could have collapsed. Thousands of British, Australian, and Gurkha lives would have been lost. He looked up, his eyes blazing. A rescue was authorized, but it was deemed suicide. No conventional unit could reach that far. So 12 men of the Special Air Service went in. They were Iron Serpent. The crowd leaned forward, every breath held. They were outnumbered 100 to 1. For 3 days they fought, with rifles, bayonets, even bare hands when the ammunition ran dry. They got the officer out. They brought him to the extraction point, but the enemy overran them. The official record states the entire team was wiped out, lost in action, names erased, mission buried for the sake of secrecy. Whitmore's voice dropped to a near whisper, raw and unguarded, but the record was wrong. One man survived, wounded, alone, hunted for weeks. Yet he made it back across the border. That man is Sergeant Arthur Collins. The words landed like hammer blows. A wave of awe, shame, and disbelief swept across the gathered families. Mothers wept openly. Fathers stood rigid, as if at a funeral. The paras who had mocked Collins stood stricken, their faces pale, their arrogance collapsing into dust. Whitmore snapped the file shut with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. He turned, eyes narrowing, and bore down on Sergeant Harker and his men. "You wear the maroon beret with pride," Whitmore thundered, his voice filling the square. "Yet you dared mock the man who embodies every virtue it is meant to stand for. Courage, honor, sacrifice. You think you understand hardship? You think you know sacrifice? You are not fit to stand in his shadow." Harker flinched. His men shifted, their bodies rigid with fear. Whitmore's tone dropped to a growl that made every syllable a blade. "You have disgraced this regiment. You have dishonored the paras, the crown, and every soldier whose name is carved into our stones. You will be confined to barracks. Each of you will write a 10,000-word essay on the history of the SAS and the operation known as Iron Serpent. You will deliver it personally to Sergeant Collins, along with a written apology." The command fell like Judgment Day itself. But before the silence could harden further, a frail hand rose. Arthur Collins. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a bell. "General, they're only lads, full of fire and vinegar. We were the same once. At that age it's easy to forget. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The soldier makes the uniform." The words were not an excuse, they were a lesson, a truth born of blood and shadows. The crowd hung on every syllable. The afternoon sun caught the faded ink on Collins's forearm. For a moment the serpent-and-dagger seemed to sharpen, as if the past itself was rising to the surface, reminding them all of promises carved into skin, not stone. Silence followed, deep, reverent silence. The story of what had happened on the parade square at Catterick Garrison spread like wildfire. First it appeared in a military spouse's blog post. Margaret Wallace, still shaken by what she had seen, wrote with raw honesty. "I watched paras mock an old man's faded tattoo, only to learn he was the last of a ghost unit called Iron Serpent. And I watched a general salute him with tears in his eyes." Her words were shared thousands of times. Within days, the national papers picked it up. The Telegraph, the Times, even the BBC ran features. The Forgotten Serpent, SAS hero found alive. The Ministry of Defense, facing both a public relations storm and a groundswell of national pride, acted quickly. A week later, under gray English skies, a formal ceremony was held on the same parade square. Rows of paras stood rigid, every boot polished until it gleamed, every beret angled to perfection. The regimental band played softly, their brass tones solemn. At the center, before a dais draped in Union flags, stood Arthur Collins. His jacket was borrowed, his shoes shined by an aide, but the lines of age and humility remained untouched. General Sir James Whitmore, his chest a forest of medals, stepped forward carrying 2 velvet boxes. His voice, though trained to command, trembled with reverence. "Sergeant Arthur Collins," he declared, words echoing across the square, "for actions of extraordinary bravery and sacrifice, long buried by secrecy. This army acknowledges what should have been honored over 50 years ago." He opened the first box. A gleam of silver and crimson, the Distinguished Service Order, in recognition of leadership under impossible conditions. He pinned it to Collins's chest. The second box, a ribbon striped in purple. The bar to the Military Medal, awarded for gallantry in the field, for wounds endured in service of crown and country. As the medal was fastened, Collins's head bowed slightly, as if he carried not the weight of metal, but of ghosts. The crowd erupted into applause, Not polite, but thunderous, cathartic, rolling across the Yorkshire hills. Families cheered. Veterans saluted. Even the youngest paras stood straighter, eyes wide, suddenly aware they were in the presence of living history. The ministry issued a formal apology for the decades of silence. Training across the armed forces was updated. Recruits would learn not only tactics, but the stories of those who had carried the unseen burdens of war. Weeks later, in a small cafe in Darlington, Arthur Collins sat in his usual booth by the window, stirring a cup of strong, black tea. The bell above the door jingled. A young man entered, plain clothes, posture hesitant. He scanned the room, then spotted Collins, Sergeant Tom Harker. The arrogance was gone. He approached the booth slowly, as though entering a chapel. "Sir, Sergeant Collins," he said quietly. Collins looked up, pale blue eyes steady. He nodded to the seat across from him. "Sit, lad." Harker slid in, setting a thick bound document on the table. Its cover bore the title, Iron Serpent, a Study in Sacrifice. "This is my essay, sir, and my formal apology." Collins glanced at it, then gently pushed it aside. "I don't need to read it. I only need to know if you understand it." Harker swallowed, voice low but firm. "I do, sir. I understand now. But if you don't mind me asking, I don't want to know about the battle. The records covered that. I want to know about the men, the ones you served with. What were they like?" Collins sat back. For a long moment he was silent. Then he began to speak, not of firefights, ambushes, or body counts, but of human fragments. He spoke of Davies, who could brew tea in a jungle clearing that somehow tasted like home. Of Patel, who carried a deck of cards everywhere, shuffling in silence before missions as though dealing hands with fate. Of Captain Morgan, who read Shakespeare aloud in a hoarse whisper by torchlight, believing words could hold back the darkness. Names long absent from the world took breath again in that cafe. For an hour, Harker listened, and every story dismantled his shallow notions of soldiering, rebuilding them into something deeper, truer. When Collins finally stopped, the young man nodded. His eyes glistened, his throat tight. He stood, placed a 20-pound note on the table. "For the tea, sir, and thank you." He left the cafe a different man than the one who had entered. Collins sat quietly, steam curling from his cup. The afternoon sun caught the faded tattoo on his forearm. #meta. For a fleeting instant, the serpent-and-dagger seemed alive again, its fangs bared, its blade sharp. Not a relic, not a mistake, but a memory, a promise, a legend.